Welcome to REST, which stands for Resiliency and Empowerment Seminar today. I am your host, Susan Gans, and I am the founder of Gans Strategic Solutions, where we operate at the intersection of human behavior and business. This show is about talking to leaders of small, mid-sized businesses, as well as nonprofits to get their perspective on their professional journeys, as well as how they're being resilient, particularly in these very challenging times. I'm so excited to speak today to Renée Burg. Renée and I know each other from some women's leadership programs and groups that we are in together. Namely the Female Wave of Change and Inspired Women Lead, and we'll hear more about them through the conversation. But more about Renée. She has a long track record as a global human resources leader in the international high-tech company space, focusing in on talent management, leadership development, and on creating engagement and change. Having worked and lived across the world, she is now based in the Netherlands, where she was also born. So we're traveling today to the Netherlands. In recent years, Renée has built extensive experience as an independent career and leadership development consultant in her own business called Capricorn Consulting. She is also an active member and board member in several organizations, some of which I've already mentioned, and she has a particular focus on empowering women to step into their feminine leadership. These global organizations include the Female Wave of Change and Inspired Women Lead, which these two organizations that I'm also a part of unite women, changing the world into a better place for themselves, their families, their communities, the organizations they work for, and the world. A big mission. As a graduate of the University of Utrecht with an MSc in psychology, she has also obtained a Master in Business Administration from the University of Rochester Simon Business School and attended professional leadership courses at the IMD Business School and Strategic Leadership, Human Resources at the University of Michigan, and a Human Resources Board program. And with that, we welcome Renée to the show.
Thank you, Susan, for inviting me. Happy to be here.
I'm so delighted to have you here. So let's get started. Take us back to earlier in your career. How did you decide to focus on human resources and people development?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting story, Susan. And it sort of sparked my interest in psychology and how people make choices. Was sparked by my own experience when I was, I think, 13 or 14, when I went to a vocational psychologist and sort of had a couple of, tests, but also a couple of conversations with this person. And this sort of gave me the impression this is beautiful because you can just listen to a person, ask a couple of very good questions, reflect on it, and it gives you yourself the sort of the openness. Okay, this is what I want to do. This is what the way or the direction that I want to take. So this was my first role model, I guess, professionally speaking then. And so I thought, okay, I want to be a vocational psychologist. So and that it took me quite some years to indeed start studying and then also going into that direction of vocational psychology. And then I did an internship in a vocational agency. And I really liked it. At the same time, I thought, if I do this all my life, it's maybe a little bit, too focused for me. So I then embarked on a second major in my psychology, which was really organizational psychology. And that sort of broadened, of course, also my opportunities in the labor market, although it was not particularly a good time to get into the labor market as a psychologist, mid-80s. But anyhow, I landed in a sort of a traineeship in HR in Philips Electronics, big company, big corporation, high tech. I didn't know anything about it because I was really like a psychologist and a lot of languages and didn't know a lot about technical stuff. But I learned that, of course, on the ground. And I started in recruitment. And I mean, I didn't know it. I didn't know how to interview, but because at that time when you study, you would be quite academic. So then I needed to interview and sort of people in 20 minutes, like, are they fit or not? So it was a great learning opportunity. And yeah, from that, actually, you know, the bigger corporations have this advantage that if you like it there and if you meet good people, and you can make your career quite diverse and sort of broaden your career and the areas that you work in quite well within the company.
Yes.
And so I did that for a long time, did my MBA during that period, and sort of broadened the HR agenda, the HR coverage in all the areas that you also mentioned. And I just also got the opportunity to work more internationally, which I liked a lot. So I think at that time it was sort of following the things that happened, but at the same time I did, you know, choose like, okay, this is a nice opportunity to get. I know this is will be a good boss for me, to challenge you and to give you opportunities. And I just loved it. And HR is still to this day the core of HR for me is indeed working with people, getting them to be, you know, getting the best out of them, helping them to discover that. And that's both what I did in my career, but also still what I'm doing now in my own consultancy, but also in the foundations that I'm part of. So that's, I think, the red thread through my HR career, the focus on people, on teams, really the personal axis of HR, I would say.
And what do you think it takes to bring out the best in people, that authenticity in folks?
Yeah, I always, I mean, when you start, it's maybe not so conscious what you're doing, because you're just, you know, you're trained, you get experience, and you're just sort of thinking, okay, this is the right way. You see role models, so you copy some and you say, oh no, this is not for me. Then you do some trainings. I think what for me the key in, you know, understanding people and getting the best out of them is really to be quite unconditional in terms of your acceptance, or sort of having no, if at all possible, no preconceived opinions about things, and just ask a lot of open questions. So just questions like, okay, what's going on in your life? What's going on in the business? What's bothering you? What do you want? I mean, these type of open questions, it sounds maybe simple, but I think that these are my secret weapon. And then coupled to these things like respect for everyone, and this unconditional acceptance that you say, okay, whoever you are, wherever you are, I listen to you and I want to hear more and see how we can make that work for you. I think these are a couple of things that help in that space.
And so I love what you're saying about asking open questions and listening and the power of listening. Can you talk more about active listening and what that really is, and in case people are not aware?
Yeah, I think active listening is something, is sort of a skill. Definitely, you can learn things like it has to do with non-verbal communication, like the nodding or the smiling, and sort of, you know, giving the person the feeling that you're there with them. So being there in the moment is really important. And there are certain things, I guess, these are in you, like your personality has to be a little bit more open or a little bit more empathetic maybe than general. So I think it's partly you can learn things, there are skills involved, and it's also about, are you the person to put yourself maybe not in the first place, but just put the other person in the role that he or she deserves at that moment. So
Yes.
I think these are a couple of things that I would talk about in terms of active listening and giving this person the full space that you're there for them.
Which brings me to my next question, which is really about empowerment. And what does that mean to you? How do you empower yourself? How do you empower others?
Yeah, the funny thing is that empowerment seems to be sort of a word that we use a lot, and still it still means a lot for me. I mean, it's used a lot and it's maybe overused somehow, but for me, it's still a very strong word. What it means for me is that you as a person, or I mean, I as a person, you as a person, everyone is sort of able, but also willing to take the lead for their own life, their own career, their own, what they want out of life. So the issue, I guess, is this: how do we enable people to feel that that power that's in literally the power that's in themselves, or unleash that power, because that's not always the case, that they realize that they can do that for themselves. So that would be great if people really feel, okay, this is my life. I know there are circumstances, but I'm going to focus on what I can influence. And within that context, I'll just make it work for me. And I'll do what I can to be independent, financially, economically, personally, and having the ability and the willingness to feel it like that and to act on it. That's empowerment for me.
So I think what you're also talking about is people taking control of their own lives and owning their journeys professionally, personally, economically, so in all senses.
Yeah. Correct. And I realize it's maybe easier said than done, and that it's not always so easy for everyone to take control and to feel that they are in control, because there are also so many circumstances maybe beyond control. And that's why I'm always focusing on what you can control. So your circle of influence, that's a really important concept for me in empowerment. And what is empowerment for you or for me or for another person outside our interview, our conversation, is very different. That doesn't matter. As long as you feel, okay, I'm getting out of my life, out of what I'm doing, what I feel that I can do, and I can influence.
Very
makes sense.
Very powerful. Absolutely. So let's talk about these times that are so challenging and people can feel that they're out of control.
Yeah.
What have you been seeing in terms of resiliency? How people are being resilient, how companies are being resilient? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think when I talk about resiliency, it's there are two elements on it. It's things that happen in personal life and things that happen in business or organization life. Okay. When I thought about this, when we prepared the interview, or you talked a bit about your idea about resiliency, I sort of saw these two things a little bit different. I mean, the personal thing is really about, what's happening in your personal life, your family, your dear friends, and sometimes really tough things happen there. And so how do you survive? So it's really about, I think, personal grit, the way, can you bounce back when these things happen? It's really difficult things. How do you help yourself to get up again? And actually that's the same for business resilience, because when you encounter a difficult situation in your business, it's also about bouncing back and sort of getting up again after things happening. For me, the most difficult business thing, I don't want to go into details of really my business life, but sort of the combination of my personal and my business life. When I left corporate in 2016, I really needed to find a different me, you know, a new me. Let's say it like that, because all my life I had been in corporate. I had my title, I had my, you know, my teams. I knew what I had to do, and then all of a sudden I had to reinvent myself. So I think that took a lot of resiliency from my part, and a lot of, you know, uncertainty, and I think that's also what's happening with resiliency. It's also about the constant need for you to adapt and to change to circumstances. Because we talked about what you can influence, but sometimes things happen you can't influence, right? Like this example I have, or like COVID-19, what we're experiencing now.
Yes.
And then you still have to find sort of the power or the energy, maybe inner energy, to come back. I think the other thing that I thought about, and I also realized for myself, is the self-care so how to build resiliency. We also teach that in our training, so that self-care is so important. You know, take care of yourself first and do what's necessary for you to feel good before you can support or contribute to others' lives. So that's, I think, a very important part in building resiliency. Mental strength, we covered that. Yeah, so these are a couple of my thoughts around resiliency, Susan.
Yes, and I think what you're saying, what's particularly resonating with me, is about that whole idea of reinventing yourself when you went from corporate and figuring out your next steps. Because I also experienced that in 2008, 2009, when my position was eliminated, and going through my own reinvention and not having that identity at first, but then realizing that, well, wait a second, I still have other roles that I play in my life, and I don't necessarily need to be defined by one particular thing that I do. And that was a big eye-opener for me. So the notion of constantly adapting and changing to circumstances, because certainly our lives have changed over the years with different advents of technology, and certainly this health crisis has now caused us to adapt in other ways. So appreciate you sharing that. So tell us more about your self-care. What are some of your tips, best practices about what you do? Do you have any morning, evening routines? What do you do to ground yourself?
Yeah, so I didn't share that I'm married long time, and I have 2 children, adult children, and while they were growing up, we were both working and traveling and still, you know, with the children. So, and people sometimes then ask, oh, how do you do that? Because they ask always the mother, never the father, but that's beside. And so then I didn't realize it, I think, at that moment, but later on my children, but also other parents, told me, okay, what you did is when you were working, and when you were free or in the weekend or in the holidays, you were full on with the kids. You were baking cookies, and you were all doing all the things what a mother typically does with the children. So I think that's sort of, that was in me. Like there's a sort of protection, like, okay, until here, I work. When I work hard, you know, but then if it's weekend or there's no work, then I focus on those things. And currently, because I have left a little bit this, you know, this big 60-hour schedule traveling behind me for a few years now, my schedule is actually 3 times a week. I do sports in the morning. So running, bicycling, and training, personal training. I love to draw mandalas, so really, you know, a little bit the creative side. I love singing and listening music, so listening to music, singing, reading books, and so I can't advertise for which app I use, but I also do meditation with the help of an app, which is really wonderful. And it also helps me calm down sometimes in the evening when the day has been, really busy, or you have evening meetings. Then I use also this app and the meditation or the storytelling of a little bit that meditation type of, calm down things that help me really big time. And I love to travel, which is a little bit difficult at the moment, but that will come back in some way.
Yes. So what I'm hearing from you is that you separate, like when you're in the personal mode, you're fully present for that. And when you're in the working mode, you're fully present for that.
Yeah.
So it's like your focus and your boundaries, so to speak. And then you do things on a regular basis with respect to physical activity and some things for your mind to keep your mind active, and then to calm your mind down after a long day.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And I always did these things, but I do them now more because my balance is a little bit, I won't say better, but fitting how I'm living now.
So what advice, with your perspective that you have now, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, yes. I would say be kinder to yourself earlier. It's still, I mean, you know what they say, when you're talking about something happening to your best friend, how would you treat that best friend? Treat yourself like you would treat your best friend. That's just a biggie for me. And I would love to have learned that earlier. And I think the other thing is that trust yourself. You can do it. You're gonna succeed. Be positive about it. These two things, I think would be helpful to younger me.
I like the be kinder to yourself. I think I'm guilty of beating myself up sometimes. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So what would you like people to remember about our conversation today?
Oh, I think a couple of things. I think it's important that you realize that life happens and it's around you, and you'll partially be able to influence and partially you will not. Things will just happen, and indeed focus on those things that you can influence. That's, I think, one of the things that has helped me. So the other thing is that the preparedness for change and adaptability, so that really you will never know what happens tomorrow or next month. So just be prepared to move and sort of stay on the direction, but be flexible to move according to the situation that you meet. And then another thing that we haven't talked about, which is really important for me, also in my previous work and also now, is that sometimes people say, oh, we have these big goals and we can only be successful if we change, this big thing. And while I love big things and big change, I want to just say that the power of one is also really important. So the moment you step in a room, the moment you step in a virtual room, you are impacting people. And never forget the power of one. You will always influence people. You're always a role model for women. You're always a role model for men. And I think that's also important for us to realize. And that's also the things that we both teach in Inspired Women Lead, as well as in Female Wave of Change. And yeah, I just want to mention those organizations here again, because they are so powerful. And they are just there for women specifically, because we feel that women can just take a little bit of extra attention. And these things are important for us to recognize and to continue to work on the power of one and be be aware that this is so important, and you will be influencing, you will be a role model for others.
I think what you're saying is by one person being themselves and being visible, they have that power to make a difference and a change, and rippling through, like we talk about in Female Wave of Change, or Inspire Women Lead, knowing that you can influence others. And how do you do that in your own feminine way?
Yeah.
And I love what you say about, again, being mindful of there are things that you can control, and to let go of the things that you can't control, and to know that change is a constant, and to always be aware and flexible that things are going to happen, and be ready for that. We don't know exactly what, but knowing, mentally preparing for, or things might be different, or something else will come along, and to know that. So Renee,
that's also, I think, where your focus on resiliency is so strong, because that is what helps us doing these things. So just want to acknowledge that your focus on resiliency is really is a good one.
Thank you. So with that, how can people find you, Renee? Because we want people to find you.
Yeah, well, so myself, I think it's best through LinkedIn, as more people spoke about in your show. So this is really about Renee, with Renee van der Burg at LinkedIn. That's it. And the foundations, the organizations that I work with are Female Wave of Change, which is www.femalewaveofchange.com. And Inspired Women Lead, their website is inspiredwomenlead.org. So these are the 3 ways how you can find me and or the organizations that I work with.
So I'm going to repeat that. You can find Renee in LinkedIn under Renee, Renee, Van, VAN, Der, DER, Burg, BURG.
Yeah.
She's involved, like me, in the Female Wave of Change. So it's femalewaveofchange.com. And also Inspired Women Lead, which is inspiredwomenlead.org.
Yeah.
Renee, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I love what you say about the power of one, and about being mindful of your circle of influence. And I thank you for all the work that you're doing in leading women through Inspired Women Lead and Female Wave of Change. And to our audience, take away from this conversation that you do have the power and control. And if you're interested in these organizations, please do reach out. Please look us up. And I look forward to the next conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.